Relational breakdown causes human beings more pain than pretty much anything else I've ever encountered, particularly in relationships where they desperately don't want it to happen. So, when I was a pastor, I always used to go, nobody sat on my marriage prep couch actually saying, I really hope this ends in an acrimonious divorce, fighting over the children and basically never speaking to each other. Never. Funny that, isn't it? And in helping people put businesses together over the years and bringing them together and going, no business partnership has ever sat there at the beginning and gone, I really hope this ends with us hating each other, fighting over intellectual property, and basically fighting over the money. So you can, there's the two probably the most deepest relationships. But I tell you what, parents who are estranged from their children, that causes huge pain. And even when somebody is in a team and the leader of that team just doesn't get them and doesn't create the environment. So relational fragmentation, relational breakdown causes human beings the most pain. So to your point, and this is why probably I'm most passionate about this, is to go, if we can help human beings do relationships better, the issue for me is most cases, Keenan, it's not that people don't want to make it work, they don't have the tools or the insights to understand why you are different to me.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the All Innovation, the AI podcast. We are joined by another amazing leader here today. We're going to be talking about leadership. We're going to talk about skill development and so much more. Steve, welcome to the show, brother. Can't wait to kind of dive into today's conversation.
Thank you, guys. Honored to be with you. Love your work, so feel very privileged to be here.
Steve, as we kind of take this thing off, what are you hoping that maybe the audience takes away from the conversation we're about to have today?
Very good question. I mean, I think you guys did such an amazing job laying out what we're going to talk about. I'm almost going, if we get to anywhere near the end of that, I'll be thrilled. So when you get to my age, Dante, you usually hope people ask good questions and know that you can access the filing cabinet that probably has been being built for the last 50 years. So my hope is that basically we add value to your audience, and I'm sure we will based on the work you guys do prepping. So there we go. There's a political answer. Forgive me.
So, Steve, one of the things that we talk a lot about here is leadership, but leadership is not the same today as it was just 5 years ago, as an example. So what's going on in the landscape of leadership? How has it evolved? And what are some of the things that you're noticing out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's lots of answers to that, but probably the one I would give you is whenever there is a technological revolution in the world on the scale that we've been going through, really from the late industrial world into the digital world now as AIs and other those ways. As a student of history, you watch and you can go back to the printing press or, James Watt and the rotary steam engine. And each one of these innovations creates a disruption in the world of work that actually changes the skills of leadership. And for me, I think we're in the midst of one of those again, where probably for 250 years we lived in the late industrial world, and we're now learning how do we lead in a very, very different landscape. And as the different waves of technology from maybe the internet and kind of increasingly AI is the next wave shaping our experience, leaders are having to learn a new skill set because fundamentally the things you got away with in the industrial age of being very clever and cerebral don't work quite the same way in the new world. And I think in the old days, people were grateful for a job because, you were born in that town and you probably had a couple of options. And nowadays, the world, in the digital world, the whole world is a marketplace, and the competition for talent is now global rather than just, you live in this town, therefore where you are. So for me, the landscape is complex beyond measure. Leaders are having to navigate new skills, particularly for those of us born before 1982. And even the skills that maybe we learned 5 years ago are having to adapt to how do I lead in a world where AI is increasingly challenging that intellect alone will be the competitive advantage in how you grow your businesses. So there's probably more to that, but that's probably my first stab at the leadership landscape is changing.
And Steve, I love this. Go ahead, Keenan.
I was going to say, guys, don't you even think that this is outside of business as well? But we see some of the impacts of this, Steve, in society, in our communities, right? It seems like we were taught to very slowly but surely, because of social media and things like that, to be followers of a lot of people today. And it seems like we don't have a lot of leadership in our personal lives.
Yeah.
And so it's difficult to communicate and translate that into our professional lives as well. I saw a little bit of a connection there, not just outside of business, but in our real world as well.
Well, I think that if you think the fundamental human need, I would believe, is for relational interaction. So human beings find I think their deepest sense of purpose is when they matter to people. The psychologists will tell us that we need to be desired and loved and to matter to other human beings. And in a sense, I think that kind of the disruption of, I guess, industrial post-Second World War, where people moved a lot, they don't tend to live with their families. But I think that the acceleration of the individualism, which in many ways social media has only made worse, because in a sense, we're almost taught to portray an image of ourselves that isn't really us. The average Instagram is questionable whether that's really the life that people are leading. So I think there's this huge disconnect between, I am being celebrated for portraying a life that isn't really me. And so therefore, in a sense, the disconnection between, you can only have good relationships with others when you have a good relationship with yourself. So if you look at the epidemic of loneliness, self-harm, depression, mental illness, it's almost one of those things, Keenan, I believe, that the technology always brings about disruption, and it takes a while to work out what's real, what's not, and what is it that's actually going to enhance human flourishing, and ultimately what is it that perhaps is detracting from it. So usually what you see is it takes about 50 years of the wild west of a new entrepreneurial breakthrough before we start to regulate it. And then we begin to realize that not everything of it is particularly helpful. And you can see a backlash already, I think, against, the social media, that somehow having young children on it is proving hugely unhelpful for them. And there's whole countries beginning to ban social media for kids under the age of 16 or under 18. So that's the kind of context into which leaders of my generation, so, by the time you usually get to 45 to 60, they're usually the years you're in charge in history. But sadly, for people like me, the skill sets of the new world are much more available to the younger generation. So we've got people in positions of power that don't really understand the digital world fully, and they're trying to lead people who've grown up in a world that is totally alien to the one that I grew up in. So in a sense, people don't do what I tell them to do anymore because I am in power. I have to lead through influence. And ultimately, I can't bring the same level of challenge, my way or the highway, or people will leave. Because so therefore, if you think about it, you've got this cross-generational challenge. And I would say to people my age, it's like, guys, you're going to have to learn how to lead in the new world, or you're going to become an oxbow lake and the river's going to flow around you. The good news is the rising generation are crying out for investment. They're crying out for mentors. They're crying out actually for people of authenticity who actually have lived what they actually say. So in a sense, there is a deeper hunger, I think, to learn from and to be mentored by, but they're expecting a far greater alignment between what you say and who you are than perhaps what we got away with when it was like, well, I can do whatever I want in my private life, but if I'm doing a good job at work, you're probably going to respect me as a leader. I don't think that is there anymore.
Steve, one of my favorite quotes is, man makes the tools, then the tools turn around and make us. And we saw this very long ago. Man created fire. If we look at the fossil records over countless years, our jaw began to shorten because we didn't have to chew food as much. And we're seeing that with all the sorts of tools that are spouting up. You talked about cell phones. We talked about social media. So we create these tools, and we're seeing how these tools are influencing our society today at large. I'm curious how you think the next generation of leaders need to take on a new set of tools, maybe the mental tools of EQ. And how does that play out in our society today? Like, what are the steps that they need to take to be able to take hold of some of these skill sets?
They're great questions. I mean, I think that it'd be a generalization, but it'll get us started. That the primary skill set of the industrial world was IQ. That basically, if you were able to analyze data, compute data, be able to store, memorize data, and then use that in a strategic way, that gave you a competitive advantage. You didn't have to be nice. You probably just had to be clever. Well, I think the evolution of AI and large language models, and in many ways even simple things like Wikipedia, is there's no and apps. The ability to memorize information, we've already long been made obsolete. So in a sense, the traditional way of leading through what I'm saying good luck with that, because in a sense, the AI is getting better and better, and we'll talk about some of that later, and the applications only grow. But what's interesting is that I would say that one of the skills that's becoming more and more important in leaders is more, well, that EQ, or that relational intelligence. Because in a sense, that's the one thing that AI can't do at the moment. And it's questionable whether it will ever be able to have that level of empathy and ability to understand the nuances of what's happening in relational dynamics. So I'm saying to leaders is, you used to think soft skills was usually a word for kind of, well, why we ought to do this because HR wants to. And now all of a sudden you're having to realize that soft skills have become essential skills, because ultimately relationships are more important now than they've ever been. I mean, some will argue that business has always been about relationships, and I think that's probably true. But the days you could kind of get away as a leader, whether you're just leading a team or whether you're leading an organization, without being able to understand the relational dynamics that are at play. And so therefore, what do leaders have to do? I think the thing is they have to become self-aware. I think that's the thing that we spend so much of my time doing, is holding mirrors up to leaders and going, do you know what it's like to be on the other side of you? Do you understand the superpowers you have, but do you also understand the blind spots that without help will undermine your influence every day? And self-awareness is a prerequisite for others' awareness. So you can't have relational intelligence if you don't actually have a degree of self-awareness, which means I know what I'm really good at, I know where my growth is, I know what I'm working on. So I think that's a very different skill set, and an exciting one, because in the sense, becoming more relationally intelligent probably makes us more human than perhaps the IQ geniuses of the industrial world that weren't always famed for their kind of compassion, empathy, and relational connection. So we're becoming softer, ironically, in a more competitive world. So in a sense, the new technologies mean that people who win more, and the people who are getting squeezed are in the middle. And that happens if you look at every technological revolution. There are huge entrepreneurial Wild Wests in the beginning, and then they begin to regulate, and then they begin to try and flatten out the curve. But right now we're in one of those moments where AI and tech have created a landscape where if you can build an app and that basically the whole world can buy it. Well, if you think of the barriers to entry of business in the industrial world, to build a factory or to, own premises, you had huge amounts of capital costs up front. Well, the new world is just rewarding people because the whole world is your marketplace versus the town in which you lived, and then you had to manufacture and sell things. And it's a very, very different model, but it's pretty frightening to a lot of people who don't really have the skills of the new world, or don't necessarily understand, why is my world changing and how do I evolve with it?
Man, Steve, I'm thinking about like our leaders of the future, the antidote to the challenges that we see in our society today. Because, the Surgeon General came on to a national broadcast the first time since the 60s, where he talked about the dangers of cigarette smoke in 2022, where he talked about the biggest threat to the American society is not another viral pandemic, but an epidemic of isolation and loneliness. Yeah. And I wonder if we've just found ourselves, especially these newer generations like Gen Z, finding themselves a little bit closer to the social drain that continues to pull us down. We come to these platforms looking for social connection, but they almost trick our brain because we get excited and we're actually looking for fulfillment, and we actually switch those two things and confuse them. But yet, leaders who have the ability to align people around a future-based cause, they can cast a vision that people feel a part of and they feel like they have ownership over. That is where fulfillment comes from in so much of our adult lives. And so I'm thinking, are great leaders the antidote to some of these challenges that we're facing in society today, in our personal lives, and it's our professional lives that have been scapegoated for so long that actually are the answer hiding right underneath our nose?
Well, I hope you're true. I hope that's correct, Keenan. I mean, I think the one thing's for sure is most generations that have gone before don't have the answers to the challenges of this world. And I think human beings are very resilient. ultimately, and they're very adaptable. And I think what happens is, if you believe in some form of Darwinian evolution, the reality is, in the moment you have to have a skill set to survive and thrive at a professional level, you usually find that gets taught. And so therefore, people begin to understand how that works. I mean, my hope is that basically human beings are creatures of overreaction, Keenan. So if you look at history, we usually go from one extreme to the other, and eventually we find our way back to the middle. So there's this naive assumption that all technology is amazing, and then the question is, we go, well, it's all bad. And then we go, how do we find our way back to the fact that actually technology used in the right way can actually be incredibly liberating for people, but it still doesn't replace that fundamental need we have as human beings for human connection. And I think that's the bit where I think people are acknowledging that in a way that I've not seen before. If you think of the progressive secular agenda of, there's a huge awakening of spirituality in Gen Z, because in a sense there is this, well, you've sold us something, a vision of the future where we are our own gods. We literally sit at the center of our world. We are individuals. Everything orbits around us. We have ultimate choice and we do what we want. Here's my truth, what's yours? I think was a particular musical theme. I think most people are realizing that that's actually not proved to be particularly life-giving to people. And that in a sense, when you have the levels of loneliness, self-harm, and all the things you've talked about, in the end, you go, well, if that was the outcome of rampant secular individualism, then perhaps what we need is a recreation of community. And I'm watching with my children, 25, 23, 21, whatever it is, that they're actually deeply committed to being in relationships and community, more than they're committed, by the way, interestingly, to getting married and going off with one person. They are rebuilding their own relational networks, and they almost dare not date each other for fear of messing it up, which is very different from the world I grew up in. But my hope, to your point, is, will the next generation actually take the best of what's gone before, but will they also learn from the things they experienced? I think that's probably true of every generation. They usually rebel against the things that they rejected from their parents, and they come up with a way. So I wonder whether we'll actually see a greater commitment to relationships, to communities, to friendships, and a greater commitment to purpose. I think this concept that chasing money and everything is all about how much you earn. I mean, telling Americans that is a bit of an anathema. So I think we're a little bit ahead of you in that one. But fundamentally, I'm watching the generation below saying, we're going to choose purpose. I was reading today about, some of the big law firms in London where you work 80 hours a week as a minimum, and maybe in 15 years' time you get to be a partner, and people are getting to 28, 29. They're broken. They have no friends. They have no life. And they go, why am I doing this? They then go and run a wine bar in France or a coffee shop somewhere. But I think this concept that we are human beings versus human doings first, I think is one of my hopes. That kind of part of what I'm trying to teach people how to do is to go, if you can teach people how to do relationships better, you'll never be out of work right now. It is literally, people are asking, I don't know how to do it. Whether COVID didn't help, I think we got scared of each other. We had lockdown for real here, not like part of America where, in my friends in Florida, lockdown meant moving the booths, 3 inches apart and carrying on. Here, we really terrified people. And we're paying a price for that. But again, it comes back to my point of going, actually learning how to do relationships at a fundamental level is what every leader needs to do. Every team leader needs to do. Every family leader, wherever it is in society you're leading, the ability to, as you said, gather people to a vision and a cause and a purpose where you actually get to know that individual. You celebrate who they are with their uniqueness and their superpowers. You bring it together to achieve something they couldn't on their own. That, I think, is where hope lies, because I don't think one clever individual is able to solve things in the way perhaps might have been possible in the industrial world.
Such a fascinating conversation. Personally, one of the things I think about at least once a week is I have a 4-year-old daughter. And in the world of AI, I wonder what skill sets I should have her, guide her. Obviously, it's going to be her choice. kind of, dad coming in. What skill sets she should really be learning? And, to your point, Steve, the what we thought AI was going to be initially, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, has transformed so much. People thought that knowledge workers were going to be the last to go. And, it turns out they're the first ones. They're the accountants, our attorneys, the people that we thought held everything together. And, you had to go to 4 years plus of school. Our AI learning models today are able to do a lot of that work. And so what does the future look like, in 20, 30 years for my daughter, and where should I steer her? And I love the conversation of EQ and really grounding people in EQ, because it seems like the last place to stand when you're talking about being valuable and being able to contend with the world. And so I'm kind of curious, what are some of the things that you guys are looking at within Giant as far as it comes to AI? That really gets you excited.
He wants to go back to your 4-year-old first, because in a sense, it's fascinating to me that my 21-year-old is one of the cleverest kids, head girl at school, has just done law at the top law school in London, and is basically not going to be a lawyer and is going to go and train to be a patisserie chef at the Cordon Bleu cookery school. Now, if I'd been an industrial parent who'd funded all those things, I'd be probably a little bit miffed. But I look at her and go, actually, I see a passion for this way beyond anything you have for law. And life's too short. And in an ironic world, you may find elite patisserie chefs are more in demand than lawyers in a decade or 10 years' time, because what you might find is a skill set that AI and tech can't replicate easily might actually prove to be of more value. So I think for me I think you have to teach your young people how to be entrepreneurs, because I don't think they're going to have one career in their lives. I think the ability to help them understand purpose, because it's going to be hard work doing something you're not actually made for over a period of time. And ultimately, some of those jobs which actually require human interaction are actually going to be really interesting to see how they work. Now, I don't believe that AI will replace everything. I think every technology usually finds its place, but we're going to have to work alongside it, use it, harness it. And one of my fears, Dante, is always that kind of the people teaching our children are usually not on the cutting edge of technology. If you think of the average teacher who's been there like 30 years, the chances are, however amazing they are they really open to the use of how technology? Education is probably ripe for disruption as well. But, anyway, back to your question you asked me. So Giant, if you think about it, has been, our heart is people. And actually, how do we help people be the best they can be? In order to be able to have a commercial model, the people who will pay for it is when you can drive the performance of teams, and when you can reduce employee, when you can keep retention and employee engagement goes up. So all the things HR measure is where we started. So we built a toolkit and resources that help people do that. Now, what's fascinating is, as tech has emerged, I remember when we created the Netflix for leadership about 6 years ago, and we thought we were on the, and realize now how static video and learning and curriculum and data and all these things. But actually, the full evolution of this is we just released an API and a full app that I literally go to people now. It's like they've digitized my brain and they do it better than me. So Bronson, the CEO's desire, says, Steve, I want to be able to do for people what happens when you're in a room with them and you do your magic. Well, at the time when he said, can you make me a video for each combination of 16 people on one topic, which was 240 videos, by the way. And I said, you're joking. Well, we now have 2.94 million combinations of relational interaction and data inside an API, where actually I can ask my 5 Voices AI any question about me, about the relational dynamics of all the people I have inside the app, inside that thing. I can even ask it, things like, what should I get Helen for her birthday? Or where should where would Izzy, a birthday present for Izzy in London we can share together. And this thing now we'll analyze who Izzy is, analyze who I am, what she would most love, where we are, and come back with some options. Because effectively, ChatGPT is pulling from the data on the internet. What we've created is high context, so it knows who you are, knows who I am, and it'll do it for every member of your team. So all of a sudden, we're at this place where we go, oh my goodness, what we built for ourselves, companies are now coming to us going, can we add your people tech inside our software? We're going, yeah, if you want to pay a license fee, we can. And then we go, well, why don't we build an integration for Slack or Microsoft Teams, where in a sense, we can give people the ability to understand why people behave the way they do. You can get coaching on every member in your team. You can get coaching on every member of your family. And this stuff is now live. I mean, if you told me this 5 years ago, I'd have just smiled and gone, you must be joking. I'm actually watching it. And I'm actually, even for me, they always say if I can get it to work and enjoy using it, then that probably means the whole of the proper digital natives, which I'm sure you boys are part of. You know, I'm like the ultimate barometer. I don't know whether you've ever read Harry Potter to your kids, but basically I always say when it comes to the digital world, there are purebloods, those of you born after 1982, you've never known anything of the non-magical digital world. And then there's people like me and others born before it. We have a choice. We can either be mudbloods and embrace it as best we can, or we can be muggles and, you know, bury our head in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist. So I always say I'm the ultimate mudblood who's trying really hard to keep up with the cool kids. So the fact I'm using this stuff to actually, when it says to me, I'm about to have a meeting with Dante, if you were in my team or my relational network on the AI, it would actually tell me, I could say, hey, give me 3 things to help this meeting go well. It knows you, it knows me. It literally goes, be careful of this, Steve. Remember, Dante likes to converse like this. And that is coming live in real time out of an AI API. So there you go. I mean, I sound like I'm selling something. I sound like I'm a convert to something, but it really is phenomenal how much is available for those that want to grow in their relational intelligence now in context, not just general, in relationship to my children, my team, anyone really who's in my relational world.
I think that really speaks to, I mean, I'll pass this right back to you, Keenan. I really think this speaks to the world that we're moving into of hyper-personalization. Keenan, you want to kind of touch on that?
Yeah, I mean, we've been having a lot of conversations, Steve, with leaders who are in different sectors like advertising and, brand building. And we talk about the world that we live in today is becoming more and more personalized to your individual needs. Yeah. And if we have technology as kind of like a lateral integration layer that can play coach to our leaders on how they can best meet us where we're at, like what an amazing future. When you listen to some of the greatest leaders of all time, you hear them not because they were skilled at marketing or skilled at biz ops or something like that, but they had the ability to meet people where they were to get the most out of them. And I think this is almost like an enablement of technology helping us get outside of ourselves. Because when you are a leader, we hear a lot about servant leadership. You work for your team. And so why should you not be harnessing and developing the skill sets that helps you get the most out of them every single day? It's like just such a beautiful like synergy between the humanistic connection and how technology can help us get there as well.
Yeah, they're telling me that I will get a prompt which says, hey, Steve, you're about to go, or you're about to meet Keenan in 10 minutes. Here's what you should be aware. Or even down to Slack saying, by the way, you've not responded to 3 of these, or the way you responded, actually, so-and-so is a nurturer first voice. They might have been offended by what you said. It may be worth apologizing. But I think the thing I'd say, Keenan, is if you actually ask what causes human beings the most pain, I would say, in my experience, and I've worked in all kinds of different places, as you know, relational breakdown causes human beings more pain than pretty much anything else I've ever encountered, particularly in relationships where they desperately don't want it to happen. So, when I was a pastor, I always used to go, nobody sat on my marriage prep couch actually saying, I really hope this ends in an acrimonious divorce, fighting over the children and basically never speaking to each other. Never. Funny that, isn't it? And in helping people put businesses together over the years and bringing them together and going, no business partnership has ever sat there at the beginning and gone, I really hope this ends with us hating each other, fighting over intellectual property, and basically fighting over the money. So you can, there's the two probably the most deepest relationships. But I tell you what, parents who are estranged from their children, that causes huge pain. And even when somebody is in a team and the leader of that team just doesn't get them and doesn't create the environment. So relational fragmentation, relational breakdown causes human beings the most pain. So to your point, and this is why probably I'm most passionate about this, is to go, if we can help human beings do relationships better, the issue for me is most cases, Keenan, it's not that people don't want to make it work. They don't have the tools or the insights to understand why you are different to me. My wife, Helen, is complete opposite to me in every aspect of every dimension of personality and view in the world. Well, when we started 32 years ago, there was nothing at all. It was like, well, we'll do our best. Now I get coaching every day, and Helen laughs and just goes, well, are you actually going to apply this? But all of a sudden, for the first time, technology means we have a coach with us at all times that's more intelligent, more relationally intelligent than we are, never gets tired, never gets it wrong, and gives us choice. So here's the thing. Just because I know the answers doesn't mean I automatically change my behavior. What it does is it gives me the opportunity that actually I can choose a better action. And I think that's the piece of self-awareness, which is when I know me and I know who I'm relating to, I can actually now have far more choice about whether I want to make that relationship work. So I'm hopeful that in the midst of all the disruption, Dante, of your 4-year-old, who knows what they're going to do for a job. But if less families broke down, if less business partnerships broke down, if team leaders really could understand the people they're trying to lead and create that empowerment for, if less families are estranged, I actually think the way we build community and the fabric of community and the basic building blocks of human civilization and society, I think if we can have anything the way this helps us prevent the breakup of families and extended families, for me, that's probably going to be more valuable than people realize at the moment. That may just be me, but I don't know what you guys think about that.
No, I think that, Steve, that's brilliant. I was having a conversation with the leader at one point in time, and we were talking about, she was a psychiatrist, and we were talking about resiliency. And she was like, Keenan, you have to recognize that resiliency often comes from exposure to previous generations sharing oral stories about the things that they overcame. So if you don't have a relationship with grandma or grandpa and your house is estranged, right, then you're not going to hear the stories of like, hey, this is what I had to overcome during the Depression, or this is what happened when I was a young boy and I did these things. And then you have that subconscious example in your head of resiliency. I can overcome these things. Somebody has done it in front of me, rather than looking to the social media and the internet of, like you said, the PR best instances of ourselves that truly aren't real. And then it kind of goes back to Dante's point, or Dante, I was hoping you were going to bring this up, but you often talk about intellectual frisbees, right? That we have to be able to throw back and forth. Can you talk about that for a second? See what Steve thinks about that?
Yeah, it's just it's a simple concept when I'm trying to communicate ideas. Is we're all talking here today, and as I throw an idea to you, I need to make sure that you actually catch it. It's one of the concepts that I learned in improv, actually. It's like someone needs to understand your idea to be able to respond and embody it. And so as we throw these intellectual frisbees around, you always need to check in with your partner and make sure that they caught it.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a book, Dante, called The Communication Code, which basically says that transmission is not the same as communication. So I can transmit all kinds of information to you, but until you've understood the intent behind what it was I transmitted and understood something of my desire of how I'd like you to reply, fundamentally we miss each other. And so therefore, this whole concept, I'm a historian, and we've been on a trip to Bletchley Park to see where the code breakers have broke the Enigma code, which really changed the Second World War. So, Alan Turing and, all those sort of things. And literally being me, I came back the next day and miscommunicated typically. And I went, I wonder if this is what happens, where actually I'm transmitting information, but without the code, you're reading or hearing nothing. What if I could send a code in advance of my communication to give you a clue as to how you wanted me to respond? So we came up with 5 C's because alliteration is always good. So are you asking me to celebrate with you? Steve, this is awesome. Well done. Are you inviting collaboration? Hey, make this better with me. Are you inviting critique? This is going live in a couple hours. Steve, what's wrong with it? Or are you just asking for care? Do you want me to just listen and be a good friend, or clarify? I.e., do you want me to ask some good questions to help get out what you do? You would be amazed, Dante, how profound that simple insight is for my marriage. Because fundamentally what happened was Helen would often tell me what she was struggling with. I go into default, well, of course I can help you. I'm a collaboration king. Yeah. Helen wasn't really asked.
all the guys here. And the girls were like, I just want you to care.
Helen wasn't asking me to solve her problems. She was actually saying, I'm really struggling right now, Steve. Nothing I say is really related to what's real. I just want to know whether the person who says they love me the most is willing just to be with me, not try and solve me, but to actually be present and allow me just to be. Well, who knew that was true? I mean, I wish they'd given me that code book at the beginning, because I assumed you tell me something and what you tell me is what you want me to relate to. So miscommunication, Dante, happens every single day in every relationship I go. Usually what happens is we either miss each other, we collide with each other, and in the end we give up on each other. And that happens at relationships at every level of your life. So every time you can give people tools or lenses that helps them understand how to communicate more effectively, or to your point, the Frisbee, when I send it to you, how do I give you clues as to how I want you to engage with it and throw it back at me? And the communication is when you understand my intent, you understand what I'm asking for, even if I didn't tell you, and then I'm able to respond in a way that makes you feel seen, heard, and connected with. That only has to happen a few times, and you go, I like Steve. He's actually willing to do the work to understand how to connect and communicate with me. So, of course, social media, digital, actually means communication happens less and less as transmission of information happens more and more.
I mean, there's so many skits on comedy. There's one that I saw, Dante. There's a show here in the United States, Steve, called Key and Peele, where these two guys are texting back and forth, and he's like, hey, are we still going to the bar? And the friend is like, oh, he's asking if we're still going to the bar. He texted back, he says, up to you. And then the friend who sent the original text was, up to you. What do you mean? There's no interpretation of the digital communication, because we're not talking about body language. We're not seeing how the message is delivered, the inflection of the voice. So there's so much more to read into communication rather than just distribution of information.
So I always say to people, if you think that just sending words is going to work, particularly if you're trying to bring challenge, we have a tool called The Power of the Medium, which says, if I'm going to bring challenge to you, Dante, if I send you an email, there's about a 10% chance you will actually hear the heart and intent that lay behind it. So it means you've got a 9 in 10 chance of getting it wrong. If I pick up the phone and you hear my words and my tone of voice, you've got about a 45% chance of hearing what I'm trying to say. If we do it on a Zoom call, you've probably got about an 85% chance. And if you do it face to face, because we mirror minute muscular facial impacts that helps us interpret at a subconscious level what people are trying to say. So I go, if you're going to bring challenge when you lead as a team leader, be very careful the medium you use, particularly as people are now leading remote teams. Most of the time we're not always in the same place, which is why I guess hybrid is an interesting concept. But trying to lead a remote team, which a lot of leaders do these days, the skills of a remote team leader are massively made more complex than when I could take everyone to the pub for lunch on Friday and apologize for the way I treated the team during the week when I got annoyed on Wednesday. So you have to be so much more in tune with who are these people I'm leading, what do they need from me, what's going on with them, and how do I calibrate what we call high support and high challenge to create empowerment and opportunity, because none of us do it by accident. Sorry, I mean, I can go on for hours doing this, so keep going, boys.
No, I love this conversation, Steve, but what are some tools that leaders can use today? And maybe we've talked about a few already, but we do live in a world where employers are looking more to hire more remote work or offshore work, and employees are incentivized to bring in top talent, and top talent wants to work hybrid. So how do leaders navigate this landscape?
Can I make an assumption, Steve?
Yeah.
I was going to bring this up, and I think this plays perfectly into Dante's point. I'm guessing that you are somebody who consistently, based on the conversation that we're having today, is always looking to consume more information to become a better version of Steve, a better leader, right? At the University of Stanford, there's a PhD named Dr. Carol Dweck who pioneered the growth mindset. And the growth mindset is all about the progression process of getting better. So I'd like to kind of hear Dante's question with the first piece. What skills do we need? And is growth mindset as the, I would say, objective of only continuing to get better over a long time horizon part of that skill set?
You usually ask three questions at the same time, and being my age, Keenan, you usually start at the end. So growth mindset is absolutely essential because in a sense, the world is moving. If you stop learning, you stop growing. And the reality is the world is just changing at such a speed. I often say that if you think of compounded interest, that basically, the earlier you start investing, the greater the return you actually get. So the people you admire most have usually been compounding influence over many, many years without making big withdrawals. So whenever you have a moral failure or something goes wrong, you make a massive withdrawal from your influence account. So for me, learning is one of those ones where you are constantly learning how to lead in the world that is rather than the world that was. And the reality is, even the tools you have, you're still applying them to a new context because each generation is different. And in many ways, technology is also changing the landscape. So, when somebody says to me, oh, that's just Keenan, you know what you're going to get with Keenan, part of me dies inside because I go, please, Lord, let them never say that about me, because it means I've kind of got to a point where I've got fat and happy and I can kind of just coast along. And I just go, I hope I'm still learning the day before I leave this planet, because in the end, you have to be contextually relevant to the world in which you're seeking to lead, or the world in which you're bringing, your specialization. We live in a world of specialists more than generalists. But what I would say is to go, you won't get away with purely being a specialist anymore. I would say that leadership is, if you want a simple analogy, and everything we built has been designed for educated 13-year-olds, so you should be okay. Leadership is the intersection of three circles, like a little Venn diagram. So leadership is to do with people, capital, and strategy. You can play with it later, but I would say to people, if you call yourself a leader and you're not making the decisions on those things, then you might think you're in leadership, but you're probably not. So do you choose who you hire and what you pay and how you fire and where you promote and where you don't? Do you choose where you get capital from? Do you borrow? Do you take investors? Which sort of capital do you take? How do you use it? How do you deploy it? And ultimately, how do you then set the strategy and direction of what it is you're going to do to deliver the vision you have for what you're leading? Now, here's the interesting thing is nobody can major in all three simultaneously. I always say, leaders, you have to major in one and minor in the other two. So the world wants to know, what are you the best at, not what are you generally okay at. So I would say, if you ask me, I am someone who's sought to be the best I can possibly be at understanding people and understanding relational dynamics, people performance, how you create synergy within people. And I am a minor in strategy because I love strategy. And because I'm that good at people, I get to walk with senior leaders and executive teams. And the reality is most businesses and organizations are dealing with the same issues. They might have different widgets, or they might be selling something different, but you can apply strategic insights. And then over the last 14 years, I've had the privilege to walk with leaders and teams through private equity, venture capital, management buyouts, you name it. And I've become a little bit more intelligent on capital, but I would never be an expert in it. And that's the thing where I say, how do I keep learning? You have to have an understanding of what's happening in the world, and you have to have a from my perspective, you also have to have a geopolitical, economic, political understanding of the world that is. Because that's what affects businesses and organizations, because the landscape into which they're seeking to bring their product or their offering, let alone when they're multinational across, we're having an interesting moment in the special relationship between us and you across the pond. It's a big issue. And you don't have to be the best in the world at it. But if you're not intelligent when you're talking to whoever you're working with or whatever it might be, or how it might impact your world, the complexities of the world and the complexities of people and the complexities of financial systems, for example, at the moment when, interest rates are a lot higher than they have been, which is impacting private equity. But there's a lot of cash out there. Where's it going to go? Now, I think to be generally intelligent is really important. Really important. And if you're not listening to podcasts, if you're not reading, if you're not actually working at developing your skills, you can become irrelevant quite quickly in the world where the speed of change is really profound. So, that's my take on it.
If Dante loves to get tactical in these conversations. So if we were to break down those 3 pillars of people, capital, and strategy, right? And somebody is baseline the same at all of them early in their career, which one do you think they should invest the most time and effort into becoming their major?
Well, I'm biased, but I would go, if you think about the world of strategy, you always go, who am I going to be competing with? If you go into the strategy world, you're into Bain and McKinsey and all those sort of very, very clever IQ guys. Well, it's going to be really interesting to see how AI impacts their world. I think it will, anything which is IQ based and models based and data analysis based. I'm watching tech that is writing code for one of the IT companies that I'm with that would have taken 3 months for a particular trial with GSK. The AI they built did it in less than 11 seconds. So now that's disruptive, but it's significant. So what I would say is this, is to go, you're probably going to have to learn all 3. But if you had to major in one right now, I'd make sure that you're at least growing in the people piece, because that is going to be a differentiator. And the more you look at what people are looking for in their people they recruit, they're no longer looking purely for who's the cleverest. They're actually looking at who has the capacity to be collaborative, to actually be able to harness what other people can bring, and actually who is capable of being someone people want to be with. I think that self-awareness piece, you're going to ask me at some point, where do people start? And I would go, if you're not working at self-awareness, really working at self-awareness, not, I'm all right, I'll read my horoscope. If you're not really trying to understand, who am I at my best? How do I annoy people? We say, what's the broccoli in my teeth? And who's going to tell you? That is going to be a massive area where you're going to come unstuck, however clever you are. So obviously, if you want to be an investment banker, you're probably going to have to work quite hard on capital and, but strategy. But ultimately, in the end, people partner in business with people they have connection with. Being the most competent is no longer enough. We talk about character, chemistry, competence, and credibility as the 4 filters, like remember like those locks you had in high school on your locker. If you only unlock 3 of those, it doesn't open. So you have to be competent. Your competence has to be credibly relevant to your client and to your world. But ultimately, if they don't trust you, character, you're going to struggle. And even if they trust you, but they don't really like being with you, chemistry, they're probably going to choose someone else, because the days when you could get by on just being the cleverest person in the room is really hard. In the end, they're going to choose who is the person or who's the company that I trust, that I like doing business with, that I think are competent and are willing to do the work to understand how their competence impacts my world. Well, character and chemistry didn't used to be a prerequisite in the industrial world. I think they are increasingly a prerequisite in the digital world, because the differentiation is not so much on product and price. It's on who, when it goes wrong, which it usually does in business at some point, I trust Dante. I actually like being with him. And I know if I go to Dante, go, Dante, you've got to give me something. I want to work with you, but Keenan's come in with 30% cheaper, and I can't go to the board on Monday and just say, hey, we're carrying on as we are. And I want to work with you. What can you do? And if Dante knows that I'm not really just manipulating him, we've probably had a business relationship for a long period of time. He says, Steve, do you know, the best I can do is 8%. I can take 8% off it. I can't get any further because the quality of what we're offering, I believe, is higher. What am I going to do? I'm going to go back to my board and go, guys, this has been great. We have the highest quality product. I've been to Dante. I've told him where we are, and he's agreed to do an 8% cut on cost. Everyone high fives me. We're good to go. Because in the end, I'd rather work with someone I trust than someone who's cheaper. But ultimately, in an era where most companies are having to do 10% more with 10% less year on year in order to stay competitive, and that's without AI disruption, I have to be able to come to Dante and ask for him to help me. And if he said to me, Steve, I can only do 5, and I know he's telling me the truth, I'll still go and bat for him because I trust that you will deliver. And that's the nature of most relational dynamics, but most people don't understand how to win influence, let alone how to keep it. That's where, compounded influence over years gives you a competitive advantage. But I promise you, if I lie to Dante or I make a massive withdrawal from my trust account with him, he will not behave in the same way. He'll go back to being transaction. And in transaction, you are in a red ocean of a lot of sharks who will eat your lunch around the world. In the blue ocean of relational trust and influence, we want to partner together because actually we have and we trust each other.
Do you know how frustrating it is to try and keep building my business and offering 30% discounts, but Dante keeps winning all these contracts? It's killing me, man. I'm just playing.
Well, here's the thinking is, the moment I always say to people, if you think of what people sell, commodities, products and services, they gradually become more valuable as you go up. It's really hard to differentiate if you're selling oil against oil. If you're selling a product, so here's my iPhone versus your Samsung, whatever it is. But here's the thing, when you're selling a service, well, the services are being massively challenged right now by the fact no one's quite sure how AI is going to disrupt it, but they know they're not paying what they used to. Here's the difference. When you have a service where they want you personally or your brand or your business because they trust you, then effectively what you do is you create a moat around your blue ocean, and ultimately you can choose price. So if your job is to keep growing the skill sets and the products you offer and actually never settle for just assuming you can just get by on what's there. So you will have to do more for less. And you will have to keep innovating. And the reality is the speed of innovation is not going to slow down. And that's why it is both a joy because relationally that's coming back in vogue. But I promise you the digital world is more competitive and more ruthless than any world we've ever lived in before. And if you look at, for example, how much wealth has been generated by the Magnificent Seven, sadly they're all American for us. We won the Industrial Revolution, by the way, and launched an empire for 250 years. So when we're complaining about your cultural imperialism that you like look at Greenland or Panama or whatever it is, we've got very short memories because there was a time when the whole globe was pink. That was because we won the Industrial Revolution. You guys have won the Digital Revolution, and the reality is the wealth creation is staggering. I mean, NVIDIA is one of my favorite examples. When I grew up, they used to make the sound cards in Atari. It's like games consoles. Now, look what they're doing now. Well, you imagine if you've been an employee buying your share options every year in NVIDIA for the last 25 years, you're probably a multi-squillionaire. Well, none of those businesses are over here. So all of a sudden, this innovative innovation is creating massive winners. I mean, look, have a look at the inauguration and the 5 gods of the new world stood there in obedience. Even Zuck had to kiss the ring in order to be able to play, and how he comes out with masculinity is the new future. Well, the reality is, you think of the kind of inequality of wealth distribution right now in our world. it's probably more so than it's ever. Well, they're saying here that the place you're born into and the family you're born into in England dictates your future more so than at any time since the Victorian England. So anyone who says it's always good isn't dealing with reality. So back to your 4-year-old, Dante, is the world they're going to grow up in is going to be a lot more competitive, and a lot harder to differentiate, because the globe is now providing services. So pick some things that actually require human touch, and where actually that is an advantage. That's what I've been trying to teach my kids, like be massively relationally intelligent, have a skill set that people want to buy, learn how to run your own business, and effectively be willing to pivot quickly and hope your dad can help you. That's probably the way forward.
Well, Steve, one of our traditions on the podcast here is our previous guest wants to ask you a blind question. So they know nothing about you, and I'm interested in how you're going to deal with this one. Okay? So their question was, how do you stay healthy?
Good question. So we wrote a book on this called 5 Gears, which is how to stay present, productive when there's never enough time. Because in the industrial world, we used to go to work, come home from work. You may not remember this, but we went off on vacation and I'd carry a mobile phone in a briefcase that was huge, didn't work. So the reality is when I went on vacation, nobody could contact me. And when I was at home, pretty much the same happened. So in a world where the digital world is 365, 24/7, you look by the average pool on a beach vacation, everyone's on their phone. So I think the thing for me is I say, you can't create more time, but you can be intentional in the way you use time. So we use the analogy of a car. I know you Americans don't really have stick shifts, but just as assume we do. And go, so first gear is what I call the recharge gear. It's no work, it's personal, intentional recharge, recreation. Second gear is depth relationship gear, no work. I'm actually physically and intellectually present with the people I'm trying to connect with. Third gear is social. Fourth gear is like multitasking work. Fifth gear is focus in the zone. How do I stay healthy? I have a first gear and a second gear strategy. So if you don't have an intentional recharge, recreation pattern that I believe happens on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually basis, you will eventually cease to become at your best in both the relational gears and the work productivity gears. So tomorrow is my midweek weekend, Keenan. Tomorrow's Wednesday. If you look on my calendar, it says midweek weekend because I just cannot continue to sustain all the relationships that want me. So if I'm at home, do you know tomorrow, I will go and meet a friend for breakfast. My group at the golf club will meet at 9:30. We will play golf together and we'll have dinner afterwards. And I may do some work in the afternoon because in a sense we're there, but I create rhythms in the day where I switch off. And my addiction to this thing is legendary. And we have rooms in our house where you're not allowed to bring them. So there's a place where there's no screens. And it's really interesting what happens when people go and sit in there. So you have to create boundaries. You have to create patterns. So I stay healthy by also, this is one for you Americans, I put in all my vacations at the beginning of the year. So I will probably have 7 weeks vacation this year. Not all the time I'm completely off, but because what I know is the new world forces us to keep working and keep working and keep working. And actually, I'm not at my best if I'm always at work, because the new world, my skills of relational connectivity and being available for people, I can't sustain that if I don't actually work on me. So, that's probably a European answer, but I did live in America for 5 years and most of my work is in America. So I do understand your addiction to overwork. And I would say Americans, they prefer to, burnout is deemed as far more virtuous than ever being perceived as lazy. So if you crash into your long vacation, the reality is you literally are burnt out. You don't really recharge and you only do 3 days at a time and everything tells you you need an extended break. So there we go. I recharge by being very intentional and going against my love of work, because I go, if I can recharge on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual basis, then I get to be at my best in relationships. And critically, I get to perform at my best, which means I get to win in every area of my life. But you can't do it if you don't have a recharge strategy. So there you go. That's my answer.
Well, Steve, we appreciate it. For everybody listening, watching, tuning in today, that's been the pod. We'll catch you guys in the next one.
Thank you.